So here we are, getting ready now for the strip down of the old PC. As you can see, it's quite dusty and hasn't actually been put together that long, only a few months, and yet the dust has built up. So we'll give it a quick wipe before we start, get some of the dust off. The back thumb screws off and the back plate. That panel just pulls off quite easily. As you can see, it's quite tight inside there. Take the front panel off as well now, and you'll be able to see exactly how tight it is inside with all the components. So we're going to lift it up so you can actually see just where that optical drive was touching the buttons inside there, hanging over the edge of the motherboard. You're going to be removing everything, the two optical drives of course. We've got there again the toolless clips on. Not as good as the new one, I've got to say. Yeah, these ones were quite difficult to sort out when I first put it together. And then I have, as I always do, screwed it inside as well, just to stop it vibrating or moving about when you take the discs in and out. So just take out, I've got 3 screws in here, just take out 3 screws. All quite tight actually. That's the 3 screws, and just check, make sure there's no other fixings there before I lay it back down, and push the optical drive out and plug the wires at the back, SATA connection and the power wire of course. Do this with both of them, and slide it out, quick dust off and put it out of the way. And again the same with the second drive, just slide it out, make sure the wires are off, and a little dust and put it out the way. So that's the 2 drives out. Next we're going to be looking at the removing all the wiring. Start off with the GPU power supply, 2 plugs, just push it down out the way for a moment. The hard drives and the SSDs to take out the power supply, the PCIe drive, GPU, the Wi-Fi, heatsink and fan, everything basically, so that we've got complete access. So we'll start with the GPU, 2 screws. As these slightly bigger screws, I'm going to just change screwdriver, get a different one. Now, to remove it from the PCIe slot, there's a little locking tab at the bottom, which is a little bit awkward to get at. and once you press it down it unhooks it, so you can just lift it out. And there is Radeon R290. The reason I need the extra cooling and ventilation that I was talking about earlier, these things get very hot, up to 95 degrees centigrade. So as much cooling as you can possibly get. They're built for that, by the way, from the factory. So next comes the Samsung 951. They just released a 950 Pro, which is the consumer version of this, with NVMe. This is a slightly older one, but actually it's exactly the same speed, and in some cases a little bit faster than the newer one. So out it comes on its PCIe card, and on this card it's got various connections for SSDs and NVMe, and there's the Samsung SSD on the back, 512 gigabyte. Blazingly fast as well. So just unplug some of these wires. Now to get this next wire out is a little awkward, because it's actually had to be threaded behind the power supply unit, which means I'm going to have to remove the power supply unit itself to release it. But I'll just take out the Wi-Fi card and Bluetooth card first. And again, bigger screwdriver for the bigger screws. And 4 screws out. Power supply is now loose. Let's just remove it itself, lift it out a little bit so that I can actually get this wire out, because it's very tight in there. So I'll just unplug these wires out of the way first. This is one of the beauties of having a fully modular power supply, although this is actually a part modular. Its main motherboard supply is built in, but all the others are plug-in. So there we go. That's the USB plug for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. The USB actually carries the Bluetooth, and this is the antenna that actually goes with it and screws in there. Dual band AC1200. So now we have the power supply loose. We're going to look next at some of the other plugs and wiring, and just release them. The motherboard plug and the fan headers, and then the SSD SATA cables, hard drive cable, and the optical drive cables, which all go into the SATA ports. Loosen up some of the wiring at the back here. One of those dreaded wire ties that I hate so much. I'm not going to be reusing any of these. I think this is the only one on here actually, so I'll just get rid of it. Carefully snip it off, not to snip any wires. And throw that away. Now we have some plastic cable ties here as well, which I need to snip off. Let's just push this through out the way first. Now, this in tighter. There we go. As you can see, you can't actually lift it out as yet, because you still have the 8-pin wire for the motherboard coming out and going to the top of the motherboard. And that is another thing on this particular case. It is extremely difficult. It's impossible actually to take it out without taking the motherboard out, and impossible to put it in if you've already put the motherboard in. So we just undo the cable ties and release everything. Another snip here, another snip there. Do be careful if you're doing this with the scissors. The last thing you'd want to do is cut one of your cables. There's that one. You see the 8-pin wire going up to the top there. All the other ones loose now. And as I said, you can't actually get this 8-pin out through that hole because the motherboard pinches it in. So you have to remove the motherboard first. So we'll turn it over again. This is actually the little beeper speaker for when you're powering on. Unplug some of the front panel header wires. And the front panel USB. And the last of the SATA cables. Just take the last two out. Up a bit more. As you see, it's very difficult to get your hands down there to get anything behind there. You can't get the 8-pin. It's very difficult to get at the fan header. So the next thing we'll do is take out the heatsink. But as you can see, it's very difficult to get at the 4 screws. So what you need to do first is actually take the heatsink fan off, which just unclips quite easily. Just make sure you don't break the clips as you do it. Just managed to get my hand in to get the fan header unplugged. And smooth round. Out of the way. Now we've got clear access at the 4 screws that hold down the heatsink, and I take them off, loosen them in a diagonal pattern as I go, slowly, so as not to put any undue pressure on any one part of the CPU. Once you've loosened the 4 off slightly, you can just loosen them off then completely. So once they are all 4 completely unscrewed, we can lift off the heatsink itself. You see the heat pipes at the bottom there. I'll be cleaning off the thermal paste later on. Out of the fan. And you can see just how much dust accumulates and why it's always good to clean your PC out regularly. My two Corsair Vengeance DDR3s then. Just unplug the last of the wiring. Push it out of the way. Unplug the 8-pin, now I can actually get at it. Still can't get it out through the hole. So I'm going to have to remove the whole of the motherboard and lift it out before I can actually release that wire and take the power supply out. So now we have to take the last wire off. You see here a little header that you get with the Asus boards, which you plug all the front panel wires into, and then you plug it in as one thing into the board itself, which makes it much easier to put all your front panel header wires in. Now we have 6 screws. Just adjust the screwdrivers because they're a bit longer. And again we take all 6 of the screws out. At the back, from the middle, and then another further 3 at the front. And I'm saying the front, that's front as I am looking at it, of course, back as you are looking at it. And there's always one screw that doesn't want to come out. No, you probably didn't see it because the camera wasn't running when I started. But do remember when you begin this process to earth yourself. You don't want any static shocks. It's not so much the tingle that you get as the damage could do to components of the board itself. So do earth yourself either with an earth strap or touch a metallic object, preferably an earthed one. So we just got the last 3 to go now. Space is really confined in this enclosure, in this box. It does make things much more difficult than it normally would be, because you're constantly having to try and find an angle to get in with your hands. I suppose it wouldn't be too bad a box if you're using a micro ATA. So there you go, so 6 or 9 screws rather removed now. 6 from the front, 3 from the back, and again it's a very tight and awkward fit. So gently and carefully lift the board out, and there it is, my Asus ROG Ranger VII. the main board out. And finally we can get, as you can see how difficult it is to get into that little hole that it goes through. We can finally get the 8-pin out. Even with access it's a struggle. Now we can pull that through. And there we go. Power supply released at last. So we get the hard drives to go, the fans to go. Bit more wiring to release here and tidy up before we move on. The SATA cables. Again, threading the SATA cable through, you have to find whichever hole you can actually manage to thread it through, because everything is so tight together that there's no actual spaces to thread it through to the very top of the case, to where the optical drives were. So just release that one. Out of the way. And that one. Another plastic tie here, just gonna snip that off. Being careful not to cut the wires. Releases the SATA cables for the SSDs on the hard drive. So now they're all released. Round, and it's a slide fit, and out comes the carrier for the two SSDs. One on top of the other, you can actually see the one, but there are two there. Now for the hard drive, it is actually screwed in. Oh, maybe not. I didn't put the screws in, but the carriers just come off quite easily. Again, a quick dust as we go along. I'll give them a proper cleaning before they get put back in the new system. So that's all the components out. All that's left now are the fans. As these screws are quite tight, and these are not such delicate components, I'll use one of my other techie gadgets. This little screwdriver is very clever. I'll do a little video on that again another time. Now these screws for the fans are quite different to any of the screws that you use on a computer build, so what I'm going to do with these, I'm going to put them actually back in the fan so that I don't lose them. Basically they're a very coarse threaded screw to bite into the plastic and hold. Now, just a quick tip, that plate there shows you the direction which the air comes out of. So if you want to know which way to put the fan in, if you've got that plate facing you, that's the direction that the air comes. It comes towards you. See how much dust is collected on the bottom there. Of course, that's where the intake for the power supply unit was. Off with the back plate, don't forget that, we're going to need that later. One of the most difficult things to find if you lose. And now it's just the fans. The two at the top. And the top just clips off, a bit of brute force. Get off this canvas. Surprising how much force you have to use to take these things off sometimes. Out with one of the fans. And then unscrew the other. And thread the power cable. And just put the top back on loosely for now. Then I'll take the front panel off to get the last of the fans. Again, it takes quite a bit of force, so I'll just put this down a minute just to snap it back in place out of the way. Move the fans out of the way. So just take this front panel fully off now. Very tight on this side, so give it a good tug. There we go. And these two fans are the two blue LED fans. As I said, I was going to put these on the front of the new build, but as it's got the large fan there, what I will do now is put these at the top of the new build so that they light from the top. They also light according to the speed that they're going, so as I've got fan controllers that adjust the speed, the faster they go, the brighter they get. There's a little Y splitter I needed there, but I may be using the header that's built into the new box. And there we go, that's it. Everything is now out. You can see it's quite dusty, even though it's only been in a few months. It's surprising how much dust accumulates with all the fans going. drawn it in.